It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And, of course, a big shout-out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast, no matter where you are, Canada, the U.S., or beyond. It's great to have everybody here with us here this afternoon. Okay, so it's Tuesday. We're going to dig into some issues here today. We're going to hear from Cam Dahl. He is the general manager with Manitoba Pork, and he wrote a column. It's posted at RealAgriculture.com. Cam is very concerned for the Manitoba pork industry, as well as the Canadian pork sector in general. This all has to do with Proposition 12, and he's also throwing in there these Product of USA label changes and how we essentially, this is created because of some of these regulations and legislation in the U.S., and in case of Proposition 12, we're talking about individual states. Really, it's creating a thickening border, becoming more difficult for countries to export. And one of the ramifications of all this is increased food prices for people in the U.S., which is something that definitely, increased food prices definitely be getting a lot of attention. So we're going to hear from Cam here today on that. Looking forward to it. We're also going to hear from Senator Rob Black. He was at an event last week. Bern Tobin of Real Agriculture had a chance to talk to him. So we're going to hear from the senator, who is always working hard for agriculture. I've got some time here today where I'm going to go through some of your feedback. You're right. You've been sending me a lot of feedback lately. I apologize. I have not been getting to it. We're going to cover a number of different issues, but we'll get to some feedback here today on the program as well, and also some time for the top ag news stories of the day. If you have any feedback at all, speaking of feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms as Real Agriculture. So like Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and TikTok, we're on all of them as Real Agriculture. So whatever, you can do all of them. Or if you have a favorite, just check us out there. So I encourage you to do that. Or, of course, you can always call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. We got a new poll posted at RealAgriculture.com. Now, it's on the homepage. You just go to RealAgriculture.com, you scroll down, and you find our fun little poll. And it's just, it's always, like I said, it's fun. It's good. But kind of an interesting topic here this week. Now, last week, remember we talked about the fact that Bunge and Viterra are looking at a merger. Now, this is fresh off of Viterra acquiring Gavilon in the U.S. Now we're looking at more consolidation, and curious what your high-level thoughts are on it. So the poll says, do you care if Bunge and Viterra merge? Yes, and I'm opposed to the merger. Yes, and I'm in favor. Or no, or who's Viterra? Maybe that's for some of our American friends. Who's selecting who's Viterra? Right? Come on, you should know who Viterra is. Well, it actually does have 8 votes. Okay, so go there, vote. Yeah, a lot of people pushing back. So the interesting piece of this is, though, and I wish we could ask follow-up questions in these polls, but why? Why? And I actually have a piece of feedback. I got an email this morning from Brian. Where is it here? Oh, yeah, here it is right here. So Brian sends me an email, and he says, hey, Sean, I'm curious. I'm really curious and following the Bunge-Viterra merger deal as well, but I hope there's a follow-up to your poll. It doesn't surprise me that most people would say they're against it, but I'd like to hear why from a farmer's perspective. At least in Western Canada, I don't see how it would change much on the competition side. Bunge doesn't have any elevators out there, so the biggest advantage they'd have is being able to source canola through an elevator system to feed their crush plants. It would probably marginally change basis at the crushers, but even that would likely only be if there was a production shortage around a crusher and they were having trouble sourcing canola. At least that's what my take would be. Anyway, following these talks as you are, but a deeper dive into the poll would be interesting to see. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that for that email. Hey, listen, in some cases, I think people are just a little bit concerned about consolidation in general. It may not even be the specifics of this deal. I do wonder if we are, because, if we do see commodity prices fall back, that can be a springboard. And we probably have to go back in time and look, when we have these cycles of consolidation, is this a springboard for more consolidation, right? And typically, you think back to when, there's Bayer Monsanto and there was like Dow DuPont Pioneer. We had the ChemChina acquisition of Syngenta and Adama being a part of that. These things tend to happen not in singular, right? We see a little bit of like, we got to, what's our move from a competition standpoint? So we'll definitely be following that, and we'll see what is said about this one, as we're already seeing some lobbying of like the Saskatchewan government to, be pro. There was an article in one of the newspapers in Saskatoon talking about how it's going to be a loss of jobs in Saskatchewan, especially at head office in Regina. So this is going to be one that's going to be debated, I think, from a number of different angles, and we'll see what the outcome is. Of course, we're following it here at Real Agriculture. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Cam Dahl of Manitoba Pork right after this.
This year might bankrupt us. If I lose the farm, I'm letting down generations of my family. Why am I the only one who can't handle it? Maybe the farm would be better off without me. Hello?
Hey, I was just thinking about you and thought I'd say hi. I know it's been a hard season, and I wanted to see how you're holding up.
We might feel alone, but we're all in this together. Visit domore.ag for mental health supports tailored for the agriculture community.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. This segment's brought to you by Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Make sure you go to borax.com. Big thanks to US Borax for being on board here through the entire spring with RealAg Radio. Make sure you check them out, borax.com. Okay, we're now going to talk about what's going on in the pork sector. We've had a lot of pork coverage lately. It's been a lot of fun, and there's some concerning stuff happening. Now, there obviously is concerns, big-time concerns, actually, about on-farm profitability right now in the pork sector. A lot of that, tied to supply concerns that are definitely out there. So big-time losses being felt by pork producers for sure right now in Canada and the U.S. But we're going to talk a little bit more about Proposition 12, a little bit of product of USA labeling as well. Cam Dahl, who is the general manager for the Manitoba Pork Council, wrote a column. We've got it posted at realagriculture.com about the thickening border between Canada and the U.S. This can't be good for producers on either side as we have that integrated value chain. So what's happening and how are things like Proposition 12 leading to this from Cam's perspective? Here joining us right now is Cam Dahl of Manitoba Pork Council. Hey, Cam, thanks for joining us.
Good to see you, Sean.
Okay, you wrote a blog post that I found very fascinating and interesting. We're always looking at potential trade issues that could really impact Canadian producers. In this case, of course, it has to do with the pork industry. Cam, why are you concerned about the thickening border between Canada and the United States because of Product of USA labeling changes and Proposition 12? What's going on?
Yeah, so the U.S. market is our number one market, and across the country we export about 70% of the pigs we raise, either as pork or as live animals. In Manitoba, that number's even higher. We export 90%, and the U.S. is our most important market. So every time there's something that slows or makes that border a little bit more difficult to cross, we make a little bit less money, and it is a real significant issue. And these two issues, I don't think they started off as trade issues. I don't think that was the intent, but that's what they're becoming. And just to start off with Proposition 12, I guess for your listeners that don't know, it's a requirement in California for very specific space requirements for raising animals, including pigs. And unlike other legislation that's like this in the past, California is requiring all the pork sold in the state to meet these requirements. So that means that their legislation is reaching beyond the borders of California and into Canada. And so if we're going to have to sell young weanling pigs to be raised in Iowa, well, if they're going into the California market, we have to comply with that California law. And it's just one state, and there could be 50 more pieces of legislation like that, and really creating a fragmented market.
Yeah, the fragmentation, that hodgepodge is really kind of it feels like it's kind of snowballing here. It was at one point we were really focused, of course, because California is a very large consumer market, absolutely. But we're starting to see other states come up with not necessarily an exact replica of Proposition 12, sort of their own version thereof. There are some differences. And all of a sudden now the Canadian pork industry is in this example is not just dealing with the United States, it's dealing with a whole bunch of individual states with their own production or selling requirements, which is really going to create some friction when it comes to the trade front. How do you enforce all this?
I don't know. I don't know how they intend to. And you're right. If I'm just going to pick on Massachusetts because I know they're going to follow quickly with legislation, and it's exactly that. And it's not the same as California. So if you're a Canadian producer and if you're a commercial producer, you've probably spent a few $1 million to upgrade your barns to comply with the Canadian Code of Practice, group housing. But if that doesn't comply with California, then you'll have to spend a few $1 million more to comply with California. And that's just California. What about Massachusetts and all the other states? Those goalposts, not only do they continue to move, they just don't exist anymore. You don't know where the end of the field is. And you don't function that way in a regular market where the rules are changing like that all the time.
When you use the example of Iowa, there are U.S. states that are fairly, I don't know if they're reliant, but the Canadian market is pretty important to them. We ship a lot of young piglets to the U.S. that are part of that supply chain, which is very, very integrated. So this is a real concern for some of those states that are doing the finishing.
Absolutely, it is. And Manitoba alone ships about 3 million pigs. Most of those go into Iowa and Minnesota, mostly into Iowa. And so, yeah, that's absolutely right. What's going to happen? Again, we have really good relationships with our customers in Iowa, but their suppliers are saying, you have to comply with these new regulations out of California or the Product of USA labeling. We chat about that a little bit too. It doesn't matter how good your relationships are; they're going to say we don't want your pigs.
Cam, in your opinion, as the head of Manitoba Pork, how do you feel Canada should be responding to this? Is there an assertive way to go about this to make sure that our concerns are heard on the trade front?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what is going to be the right alternative or the right option, but we should be far more assertive than we have been. Because not only do I think that this is going to extend to other states on, the space requirements, but what else is going to be put on a ballot somewhere? Is it going to be water requirements? Is it going to be particular carbon requirements? What else is going to be put on a ballot that all of a sudden we're going to have to comply with? That's, not written into trade agreements, not based on science. Where is this going to end? It really is a Pandora's box. So, whether it's the, go together with Mexico and challenge under the CUSMA, or whether there's a WTO route, we should really be exploring options. We shouldn't be letting this pass lying down.
No, we've been kind of focused here on Proposition 12, but there also is a concern about the Product of USA label changes. Now, I'm very familiar with this on the beef side.
Yeah.
What is the pork industry's concern when it comes to the Product of USA label changes?
Well, again, we're talking about this integrated North American market, or integrated Canada-US market. And that really is beneficial to everybody involved. It's beneficial to Canadian producers, it's beneficial to American producers, and it's beneficial to consumers as well. And right now, if you buy ham in the U.S. and it's been processed at a U.S. packing plant, but that pig happened to be born in Canada, that can still carry the Product of the USA label. And that, is in recognition that our standards are, equitable, maybe not 100% the same, but we have the same food standards. We have the same animal welfare standards. And that is just simply a recognition of that fact. What the administration is proposing is to change that so that the requirement will be born, raised, processed, and packaged in the U.S. So again, those Canadian weanlings going down to Iowa, if Costco comes back and says, so if you go into the store, all their pork products are labeled Product of the U.S., even in Canada.
Yep.
And if they go back to their suppliers and say, we're not changing our marketing, we're not changing our labels, you comply. So what happens to the value of those 3 million weanlings that are going into Iowa and Minnesota every year? They're discounted.
So Cam, this is exactly what you want to sort of parallel this back to Proposition 12. This, you mentioned Costco as a major retailer. There's others, Walmart and of course others. This is my concern with Proposition 12, is how those major retailers react to having to deal with a large state like California, what their requirements are. And then basically some of the neighboring states in the western half of the U.S. don't even have to have those kind of regulations. But the grocer is going to say, well, you know what, we're not running parallel systems here.
Exactly. We're not segregating between Washington State and California. It's all the same. And it's California compliant.
Okay. So is any of this, so I think sometimes we think that we are leading the charge in Canada when it comes to some of this stuff with, sort of head scratchers, right? In this case, it's the U.S. and Canada is sort of looking down and saying, what is going on here? Is there movement afoot in Canada for these kind of strict sort of regulations?
We there might be some of my members that disagree with this, but we have a pretty good system when it comes to our good approach through the National Farm Animal Care Council, and developing the codes of practices for the care and handling of all animals. All farmed animals have a code of practice, and it really does come down to there's actually some science behind what's in that code. There's NGOs around the table, there's farmers around the table, there's vets around the table. That we don't see as much of this fragmentation or arbitrary, because what's in California's property, it's arbitrary. And so we really do have we've evolved a much better approach here in Canada.
Yeah. Okay. And Because there was talk last week in the U.S. I was hearing some American trade officials talk about how Canada has Proposition 12 like requirements. Is that not? That's kind of a general statement, not necessarily totally accurate.
Well, I'm not sure of where those are, especially when it comes to requirements for selling in a store, at your grocery store. I'm not aware of any requirements like that.
And the big question that keeps on getting asked is the auditing of some of these requirements. So let's just say somebody in Manitoba who is shipping piglets to Iowa. Who's auditing that? Is the California Agriculture Department coming north to do on-farm audits?
I wish them well if they want to come onto farms in Manitoba or anywhere else. That's not just something that it's not going to be acceptable. So no, California FDA agents aren't coming onto farms in Manitoba.
Yeah, I want to video all that.
Yeah, exactly. But what might happen, Sean, and again, we're talking about the power of some of these big retailers, whether it's Walmart or Kroger or Costco. They may require that audit, right, of their suppliers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be California officials or right. That comes back to the power of those large retailers.
So at a time where all we're talking about is food prices and food inflation, and this is a major concern for Americans and Canadians, here we are what one would maybe call stubbing our toe and self-inflicting a wound. And isn't the impact here just higher food prices to try to meet all these increased requirements? And
I would add reduced choice. So those are the two impacts: higher food prices and reduced choice. The segregation always costs money. Right. And that's what both of these are putting into place, both the labeling and Proposition 12. It's going to cause increased segregation, and it's going to cause discounted Canadian discounts on Canadian pork and Canadian pigs, and of course beef in the case of the labeling. And consumers in the U.S. are going to pay more. So,
the initial thrust here, Cam, on Product of the USA label changes was to prevent certain practices, reboxing, right. Finished, boxed beef coming out of South America somewhere. The original intent was not to prevent 3 million piglets from coming into Iowa that are essentially just not born. They're born in Canada. And at the age of how old?
Oh, they're like 7 kilograms or something like that. They're pretty small when they go across the border.
They're just little piggies. They're like the 3 little piggies that went to market.
Exactly.
Get on a truck and they go to the U.S. They are raised and finished and slaughtered and packaged and boxed in the U.S. They would not be called Product of the USA. That seems like a bit of a head scratcher.
It is a huge head scratcher. Again, especially getting back to, our standards are the same, right? Are equivalent. We have equivalent standards. So, yeah, hopefully there's still time to change some of this.
Cam, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Always good to chat, Sean.
Would love your feedback on this issue. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Senator Rob Black and get his perspective on what's happening in the industry of agriculture from his lens of the Canadian Senate. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Are you looking to simplify your sulfur solution on the farm? Well, hey, you know what? You should be. Get Biosol Premium Plus from GFL Ag, the unique combination of compost and elemental sulfur that provides, listen to these benefits, cost-efficient, logistically friendly, agronomically sound, long-term, and environmentally friendly. This is the sulfur solution you got to be thinking about. Learn more at gflagri.com. That's GFLAGRI.com. Well, one of the big friends of the industry of agriculture in Ottawa is on the Senate side, and that is Senator Rob Black. And at a recent event, Bern Tobin had a chance to catch up with Senator Black and talk about some ways that the Senate is having an impact on agricultural policy.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Today I'm at the Syngenta Open House here in Guelph, Ontario. I'm catching up now with probably the busiest senator in Canada, Senator Rob Black. Hey, great to see you.
Good to see you too, Bern. It's good to be here to see this building being reopened, and the space is tremendous. Really, it's I think it'd be a great place to work.
Now, Senator, you seem to be out there everywhere talking to everyone. Your Senate seat seems to be keeping you busy.
It is, and I'm enjoying. I like to be busy, and so I'm not one to sit around and wait for things to happen. So I get out. I think it's important that people across Ontario and across Canada know what the Senate's all about. Senate of Canada is all about. And so I'm out and about and chatting about what we do in the Senate of Canada.
Now, you were appointed to the Senate in 2018. Tell us about your background in agriculture. Rob, a lot of it, it comes back to this area, 4-H, the Advanced Agricultural Leadership Program. I think it certainly equips you to tackle farm policy in the Senate.
Absolutely. My first 15 years out of the University of Guelph, I was worked for the provincial government, mostly in the ag ministry, and then moved to the other side, and the not-for-profit side, and worked for a number of organizations, ending with the Rural Ontario Institute and delivering the Advanced Ag Leadership Program. Background, grew up here in Wellington County, 4-H. I've been involved for almost 50 years. I tell people I wouldn't be in the Senate of Canada were it not for 4-H, and I will say that anywhere. It's a great program, and so I continue to support it. And I think the opportunity to raise the area of agriculture, the issues in agriculture in the Senate of Canada is so very important.
Hey, let's talk about the impact the Senate can have on agriculture in this country. How can you and other senators advance and push ag policy forward?
So in this new world of the Senate of Canada, where we don't have we have parties and groups, and the senators are appointed through an independent process, I'll suggest that there's more opportunity for all my colleague senators to be to raise the issues of agriculture and ask questions. It's not a partisan thing, right? And so what happens in the House of Commons doesn't necessarily have to happen in the Senate. And so we can ask those questions, the tough questions. We can raise issues like soil health in Canada, which I'm doing at this point in time, and many other things.
Tell us about, I guess, some of the highlights, Rob, in your first 5 years, in the Senate. As I say, I know you're very proud of the work that you've done to recognize the importance of agricultural soils, as well as establishing Food Day in Canada.
Exactly. So those are my two highlights, right? But the first year I was in the Senate of Canada, I was the second most lobbied senator on Parliament Hill, and that's because no one else was speaking about agriculture, and so all the ag organizations across the country were interested in chatting with this House ag guy. Since that time, I know others are taking that lead, but I do get a lot of provincial and national organizations coming to the office wanting to tell me about their issues, and then I can try and help them through the processes or raise the issues with ministers and our government leader in the Senate. Two of my favorite or biggest wins, I think, would be getting a soil health study underway. Took 4 years to get it underway, but we did start last fall, and it'll be, I hope, pardon the pun, a groundbreaking study that is 40 years in the making. The last one was done almost 40 years ago. The other one, in recognition of Food Day of Anita Stewart and her work around Food Day Canada, was the Food Day in Canada Act, which was proclaimed a couple of weeks ago by the Governor General. And so 20 years after Food Day Canada started, we will see a national Food Day in Canada in this coming year in 2023, August the 5th.
Now, Rob, are there key policies and initiatives you feel the government needs to focus on to ensure sustainability and growth in agriculture?
I think we need to support innovation and in the agricultural industry at the federal level. My biggest concern right now is food security and the whole idea of land use policies, which is a provincial issue. And so, at the federal level, there's not a lot we can do on provincial jurisdictional issues. But if we don't have enough land across this country to grow food and agriculture, to use for agriculture, we're not going to be able to feed our own population, let alone the world. And that's what we're being asked to do. So food security, I think, is a big one that the federal government needs to look at right now, especially in light of some of the provincial policies that are currently taking place across the country.
Now, you mentioned, obviously, in light of what's happening in Ontario and some of the challenges with the Ford government. Now, provincial jurisdiction, as you mentioned, but obviously it's in your backyard. How do you make that an issue federally? How do you put it on the table in the Senate and get it in front of the people who can impact some things federally?
So you're asking a question that I continue to ask, right? The way I'm starting to do it is to ask questions of the government leader and make statements in the Senate chamber about issues that are affecting all of us here in Ontario. And I have the right to do that. But I have to keep in mind that land use planning is a provincial jurisdiction issue. So it's a fine line, but raising the issues of food security, that's federal. That's national. It's international. And so we need to think about that. I'm hopeful that some of the work being done in the soil study, some of the issues raised will we've already heard from folks that talk about food security, talk about the need for agricultural land, and so some of that can come out of the soil study, right? But it's a fine line.
Hey, final question for you, and then that's about something specific. Bill C-234. That's the carbon tax exemption for natural gas, propane on farm. It's at second reading in the Senate. How can we expect that to move forward in the months ahead?
Well, I'm hopeful. I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to see it pass before the end of June, if all goes well. The sponsor has spoken to it at second reading. I've spoken to it. The critic we're waiting on the critic to speak before it can be sent to committee. I anticipate it'll go to part of it will go to the Ag Committee and maybe to another committee as well. But if we can get it through, we can get it passed before the end of June. Every day that it sits waiting for the critic to speak is another day that it's not going to pass.
Well, Senator Rob Black, we appreciate you taking some time for Real Agriculture, and as I say, we'll catch up with you down the road.
Let's do that. I always enjoy this, Bern.
That was Senator Rob Black talking about some of the work that he is doing in Ottawa. That event was the, reopening of the Syngenta head office in Guelph, Ontario, that Bern was in attendance for. We've seen a lot more noise, and I think we have a little bit more of a vocal Senate at this point than, say, we did maybe 10 years ago. And before, not to say that things aren't getting through the Senate, but it feels like there's a little bit more friction, that things just don't sort of slide through like a big water slide. There is some questions being asked. And that's not a bad thing, really, if you think about it. It's a good balancing act. I'm sure some of you can pull examples where it wasn't good, but I'm just talking in generalities. 100,000 feet. I think, and it's good to have somebody in the Senate like Senator Black, who is really a champion of agriculture, making sure that his other senators are aware of what agriculture is doing and how this impacts agriculture and how this impacts food security, because he did say there are provincial issues, but then there also is national issues, and food security is one of them, just to make one example there for sure. So it was great to have Byrne catch up with Senator Black. When we come back on Real Ag Radio, we're going to get to some of your feedback. You've been writing me emails, sending me tweets, and leaving me text messages, and we're going to get to some of those when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
As we get ever close to the beginning of June, we start to see kind of a, May is a bit of a lighter month when it comes to meetings and things like that, which is totally understandable. Calving, and we're trying to get crop in the ground. But as we get into June and July, we start to see some meetings start to pop up again. One of the ones that's happening in July, it's July 3rd through the 6th, happening in Calgary, Alberta, is the 2023 BIF Research Symposium and Convention. It's going to feature educational programming and networking opportunities with leaders within the industry. The technical breakout sessions will focus on a range of beef production and genetic improvement topics. You can see the schedule and find out more about how to register by going to beefimprovement.org/symposium. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, let's get to some of your feedback. I'm always saying, hey, send me an email, send me a tweet, call the listener line. And, sometimes we don't get to all of it. Well, let's dedicate some time here to getting to some of your feedback. So last Friday, there's a whole wide range of topics here. Last Friday, we were talking about this new Canadian water agency, and we were comparing it to what's happening in the U.S. in terms of the battle over WOTUS, and as far as what is a navigable waterway and what is not, and how farmers have been pretty concerned about WOTUS for going back even before the Trump administration into the Obama administration. I think kind of when this really all heated up. But email here from Brian, who says, hey, caught your show on my way home from golf on Friday and heard you say the new Canadian Water Agency could be considered a tool, but concerned about what it will actually do. Might I suggest the first thing to consider or watch for might be which human tools the feds hire to direct, manage, and operate the agency. Given that these persons will be hired or appointed by the radical environmentalist Guilbeault, Wilkinson, and or Bibeau, I would be very concerned. Take care, Brian. Hey, Brian, thanks for the email. I got a couple other emails very kind of similar to this in terms of, hey, the signal will be see who is leading this. Who is leading the charge? Is it somebody that it would be considered more of a moderate, somebody that's a little bit more practical, or is this somebody that's going to be really engaging in some big time changes? And hey, listen, water's very important to agriculture. It either comes from the sky or canals, and where we drain, we try to put it back on the land. Water is important; it's critical. It's really what feeds the plant, right? Beside all the nutrients. So this is one to very, very much keep our eye on. Got a bunch of emails related to some of our BSE coverage. Lori sends me a tweet and says, in my opinion, expensive land and booming grain markets have a lot more negative impact on cow herd numbers than BSE did. BSE just accelerated the process and hammered home biosecurity risks in the cattle sector. The heydays of cattle were the 1980s with cheap land and cheap feed. We have neither today in 2023. Appreciate that, Lori. That's a good email. Here's the thing I would say about that. I'm not sure, and we heard from Dennis Laycraft from CCA talk about how there was BSE and then there was like this perfect storm of other events. So we can argue what was the real cause. We know this, Lori, you're correct, that the high, the grain prices and how much more lucrative it has been to be a grain farmer the past number of years instead of a rancher, that has not helped us rebuild the cow herd. Right? We're plowing under grass and we're putting in crops, right? And because we've been teaching farmers to think, to look at their financials, right? To do enterprise analysis. And when farmers have been doing that, it's been a pretty easy decision. And then you put the 2021 on drought on top of that as an example, and that kind of stuff isn't helping either. Got an email here from Will, and Will says, man, what a great topic this week. Well covered. Well, hey, thanks, Will. I really appreciate it. Heard you talk about emotional responses, and I'm in that boat. I'm 40 now. I graduated from Kempt College in 2003 and started a job at the local input supplier. Luckily, I had applied to transfer some credits to Guelph University for an ag degree. We had a decent-sized cow herd, and we're in a position to expand if I wanted to ramp things up. Probably on May 19th, I was thinking I could work that job for a few years to get my feet under me and go home to farm. And by the time I had to commit to Guelph, I figured that might be a better path, but which it absolutely was not. Which it absolutely was. Pretty much everything I have today, I owe to my time at the U of G. We've still got a cow herd amongst other enterprises, and it's good to see the positivity in the beef industry. I'm lucky I didn't graduate in 2001 or 2002. And as somebody that works in the banking industry, I've had more than a few farmers in more successful enterprises look at me like my dog died and say sorry when I tell them we have beef cows. Thanks for that email, Will. Lots of emails like this. And a few of you wrote essays explaining your situation, how you were really impacted financially, emotionally, and how that really has still really impacts you today. So I really appreciate it. Doug here says, until CFIA changes our SRM protocols to equal that of the states, BSE is still costing Canadian farmers. Don't understand why it takes so long when our risk status is the same as the U.S. Sometimes I think that nobody is working on this at CFIA. Another email from Peter who says, when BSE hit, we were operating a small feedlot in Ontario, about 200 head. We had cattle in the sale at the Ontario Stockyards in Cookstown when BSE case was confirmed. Prices dropped from that moment on to about 35 cents per pound. We cannot pencil out buying replacements and did not see a future in feeding cattle. So we formed a numbered company to help minimize taxes and became sheep farmers. I had owned cattle since I was 16 years old, so this was a big decision emotionally and financially. Certainly very stressful as we had huge losses on each steer. We had at the time of BSE and a large tax liability. In the long run, this was a good move as the sheep business was growing rapidly in Ontario. The first rule of cattle feeding is your first loss is your best loss. In the long run, it was a good move. Many people said to us, you were lucky to get out of cattle. It was not luck. It was a good business decision. Thanks for that email, Peter. Really appreciate it. And finally, we got an email here from Dan, who says, today I felt compelled to share a pivotal moment from my past that shaped my perspective towards the industry. Back in 2003, I was a 27-year-old graduate student working a summer job with a bank. Just like many of you now, I was curious, eager to learn, and hungry for new experiences. On day 3, during my very first group conference call, an announcement was made that shook the Canadian farming industry to its core, the discovery of BSE. I have never heard such silence in a room of 15 people that were so filled with shock and concern. We were uncertain about the future of farming and the impact this would have on our lending. It was a testing period, but it also taught me resilience, adaptability, and the importance of clear, supportive communication. Remember, we're all part of an ever-evolving industry, and every challenge presents an opportunity to learn, grow, and forge a stronger community. Hey, Dan, I appreciate that email. That's some perspective attached to that for sure. Remember the last line there. Remember, we're all part of an ever-evolving industry, and every challenge presents an opportunity to learn, grow, and forge a strong community. Yeah, it's about getting to the other side, right? Just another trip around the track. Try to get to, that's part of that resilience and sort of that look ahead. And this hasn't been a good year, but next year will be. It's sort of that baseball mentality for sure. So I appreciate the emails from everybody. And please keep them coming. And you can comment on any story, any topic that we discuss here on the show. Really, really do appreciate it. And it means a lot you take the time to type these up. So send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Let's take a break. When we come back, we got the top ag news stories of the day. We got an election result in Alberta and a whole lot more. You're listening to Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147. I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Did you hear Alpine brand liquid fertilizers? They're turning 50 this year. So that's a big congratulations. From the beginning, we have always applied the 4R principles in our approach to the fertilizer industry with the right source, right rate, right place, and right time. Alpine is committed to Canadian farmers, always delivering the highest quality liquid products, including our patented award-winning BioK line of nutrients. To find out more, visit them at alpinepfl.com or call. Here's the phone number. Write it down. 1-800-265-2268 today. That's 50 years as a company and thriving. I've been to the plants in Ontario. It's very, very cool. So I got a big tour. It was a lot of fun. So check them out. That is alpinepfl.com. Let's get to the top ag news stories of the day. Alberta's incumbent agriculture minister and official opposition ag critic both appeared set to return to the legislature as Danielle Smith is expected to form that majority government that she was seeking. Now, you would think, I don't know, I haven't really made phone calls on this, but you think that Minister Horner will be back as the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry. Well thought of in the industry. I would say a bit of a quiet guy, but well thought of. We've had him here on the show, and I think he's very relatable to a lot of farmers across this country. Also, Heather Sweet, who was the NDP sitting agriculture critic, she also held on to her riding, which was in Edmonton Manning. And she is also somebody that's very interested in the industry of agriculture, speaking up and challenging Minister Horner on a frequent basis in the Alberta legislature. So Smith gets her majority. And people freaking out. You know, here's one thing. Well, not freaking out in rural centers, more so some of the urban social media. But it is insane. Maybe not insane. I shouldn't put it that way. Incredible how rural Alberta voted against the NDP and voting for the UCP. The results are staggering. No wishy-washiness there whatsoever. Now, at the beginning of the show, we were talking about the potential merger of Viterra and Bunge. Well, it's potentially moving ahead with the support of two of Canada's biggest pension funds, which would emerge as the big shareholders in the new agribusiness company. So this is from the Globe and Mail. Two sources close to the talks that a deal should be announced within weeks and would create one of the world's biggest handlers of grain and oilseeds with the reach and heft to compete with industry leaders such as Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland. who also based in the U.S. Midwest. One of the sources said final details of the merger, such as the ownership levels in the new company, yet to be determined. And some people talking about, is this a sale or a merger? Not sure it matters, but that, you know, a lot of that stuff's still not really figured out. The source is the Globe and Mail couldn't say who they were. The sources said the two Canadian pension funds that own half of Viterra, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board with 40% and British Columbia Investment Management Corp with 10%, would almost certainly swap their stakes for a stake in Bunge. Glencore with 49.9% would do the same. So we'll see what happens as time develops on that. Those talks. The $54 billion U.S. pork industry is being whipsawed by supply and demand forces. This is the Wall Street Journal. Years of rapid expansion have left the sector oversupplied as demand is waning, costs are rising, and new regulations are looming. We've been talking about these regulations. Proposition 12. We're doing this to ourselves. The industry is not doing it to ourselves. Citizens are doing it to themselves by voting for this stuff. The Wall Street Journal reports hog farmers are being squeezed and some are even being driven out of business as they lose money at the worst rate in decades. The impact is cascading through supply chains as businesses from hog farms to processing plants scale back operations, and meatpacking companies, including Smithfield Foods, Tyson Foods, and JBS, wrestle with shrinking profits. Here's the thing. When you have legislation like Proposition 12, there's somebody sitting in LA saying, you know, we need to do this. This is how we should be producing pork. And what they don't realize, because they're getting one side of the narrative here, is what they don't realize that the activists pushing for this stuff are really just trying to eliminate pork production altogether. Here's the other thing they don't realize. If you were to also ask that person sitting in their nice high apartment in LA, they would say that, you know, they really support small farmers. And once again, what they don't realize is by having regulations like this, they are putting a tremendous cost burden on smaller producers, relatively speaking, to larger producers. And what happens, and I've heard this from Jim Wiesmeyer from Pro Farmer, the large packers like Smithfield are working with their larger value chain pork producer, you know, partners to be compliant. And so this potentially becomes even harder for smaller producers to even get pork into California and be compliant. There was a story on RFD TV this morning about there's a lot of concern about the black market thriving for lower income families who want to buy pork but can't afford the compliant pork. This is a mess. It's a mess. Unintended consequences, like in full speed. Like we're in gear 8 here. It's unintended consequences on steroids. More high school graduates are skipping college and going straight into blue-collar jobs. The college enrollment rate for recent U.S. high school graduates aged 16 to 24 declined to 62% last year from 66.2% in 2019, just before the pandemic began, according to the latest Labor Department data. College enrollment has declined by about 15% in the past decade. The reasons include the high cost of university education, colleges closing, and uneven returns from what getting a degree as well has into a hot job market and sort of balancing that out. So that also from the Wall Street Journal. So the former students are stepping into a historically strong labor market for less educated workers. Job growth at restaurants, theme parks, and other parts of the leisure and hospitality sector, which typically don't require a college degree, has increased more than twice as fast as job gains overall in the past year. Brace yourself, according to Elon Musk. Okay, he said, brace yourself for the intense pressure on commercial real estate to spread to house prices. Commercial real estate is melting down fast. Home values are next. That was a tweet from the tech billionaire. So we'll see if that, wow. I wonder if he would throw in land prices for farmers. I hope not. We could have a problem on our hands. A new agreement between the U.S. and 13 other Asia-Pacific nations is aimed at moving supply chains away from dependence on China. The accord was reached in meetings over the weekend. The U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and delivers an early win in a new U.S.-led initiative to strengthen economic ties in a region critical to trade in electronics and consumer goods. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.